I'm at the office of the opposition leader on West King's House Road in St. Andrew, and I intend to speak with Mark Golding about four major things: the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the government's management of the crime situation, what to do about an economy that has seen its forward momentum stalled, and of course, PNP business. Mark Golding, welcome to the conversation, sir.
Thank you.
The first guest you are of the 6th season.
Nice to be with you.
Good, excellent.
Yeah, man.
Let's start with the COVID-19 pandemic, because we heard in the parliament recently that the delivery of COVID-19 vaccines that the government would take earlier delivery than they had forecast. They had signposted April, but the Minister of Health and Wellness says, well, there's a batch coming in February, and that there's going to be an intense schedule of meetings with stakeholders to preside over the rollout of the vaccines. I start there because I want you to use that as the basis to gauge how well this Holness administration has managed the aspects critical of this pandemic.
Well, it's a multifaceted question, because managing the pandemic has a public health dimension, a healthcare dimension, and an economic dimension, and a social welfare dimension. So there are different aspects to it. In terms of the health situation, I think Jamaica was very anxious when we had our first case, and the Disaster Risk Management Act was in place, provided a framework which could be used for trying to control and regulate behavior of the public in response to the crisis.
That's legislation passed by the previous PNP administration, correct?
That's right. We had passed it. To be honest, at that time, the focus was really acts of God, such as hurricanes, earthquakes, and so on. Nobody envisaged what is now happening, but it's flexible enough that it provides a framework that can be used for the situation we now are in.
Yes.
So the initial response was, was sound. I think we tried our best to contain the spread of this thing. And of course, eventually we had to close borders and so on. But as the economic pressures mounted from the impact of that, the reopening was a bit problematic. The initial reopening, I think, was not very cohesive. There was not very clear understanding of what the requirements were for people coming into the island. They seemed to shift quite a bit, and fairly frequently. And then some decisions were taken in August, which I think cost us fairly dearly, because first of all, there was over the emancipation period, there was a kind of loosening of the situation.
For the celebrations.
The celebrations, and that seemed to have really occasioned a significant change in the outcomes in terms of new cases coming on board. And then, of course, the Prime Minister called elections in August as well, just when the spike was happening, and that further exaggerated and exacerbated the problem. So I would say that we've had a mixed response, but overall, Jamaica, I think if you look at, certainly by comparison to some of the worst hit countries, we've not been that badly hit so far. In comparison to, say, our peers in the CARICOM region, we've been a bit worse off in terms of the volume of positive cases and deaths. So it's not an easy situation, and it's not something I want to try and attempt to politicize in any way. But it's a mixed bag. Now, of course, the key issue is how do we get the economy back up and running? Because what is happening now is that people who have lost their jobs, or businesses that have lost customers or lost business and have been operating by using savings and so on, those savings are now depleted. And the banks that had extended moratoria to borrowers, are also now seeking to recover on their loans, or at least have the interest paid.
Opposition leader, it is a good point to ask you about the government's CARE program. The government has made much, some people say rightly so, of the benefits that they've been able to provide to certain groups in this time, groups which would have lost their jobs, especially in tourism, the one-off grants to people who weren't in employment at the time COVID hit. And they've said that, look, this is a sign of a caring government, a government who acted swiftly to it wasn't everything that everybody wanted, but it was something to keep people going at a difficult time in the country and for the economy. Your impressions on how the CARE program, the package, has been rolled out?
Well, I think that the tried their best to respond quickly, and I think they did a reasonable job at doing that. I think looking back on it now, it was very front-loaded, meaning that the benefits that were made available really were dispersed in the first 3 to 6 months of the pandemic coming to Jamaica. But the impact on people's lives of the pandemic, the economic impact in particular, was not limited to that period. And in fact, because of the whittling down of people's savings and as this thing starts to bite and the effect of the contraction of the economy, which is over 10% in real terms this year,
Yes.
as that starts to feel its way through the economy, people are really starting to struggle. And the problem is that there's been no announcement of any further relief whatsoever. Now, when you look at the volume of the relief that was given under the CARE program, it's by Jamaica's historic standards, it's a sizable amount because we've never really had a crisis like this before.
Yes.
But in comparison to other countries, it was really rather modest. I mean, and I'm really focusing on the relief that was given to individuals who are in distress. It's less than 1% of GDP that was given, you know, and for the unemployed in particular, and those who are really marginal in terms of their existence, it was roughly $4 billion that was spent in that period through the Compassionate Grant in particular. Now, these people haven't had anything since, April, May, and the situation is not getting any better right now. Yes. So I am concerned that the social fabric of the country is under stress, and the businesses, especially the small and medium-sized businesses, are also under stress. And I'm not really hearing anything from the government as to what kind of relief program can be afforded or programmed. The Minister of Finance has been very, very cautious in terms of his fiscal approach. He's very focused on the debt dynamics and wanting to ensure that the country continues its path to reducing debt. Most other countries have seen the crisis that we're in now as an extraordinary situation in which you can't really focus on that. You have to focus on saving the country, its economics, and its social fabric from being too badly damaged, so that when the pandemic is brought under control, you have a situation where you can bounce back more quickly. So I'm concerned that the government is not really, I think, doing enough now, or the budget is coming, we'll have to see what they plan to do.
So with the budget coming though, would you suggest CARE Package 2? And if you're suggesting a CARE Package 2, is there the cash to put into that CARE Package 2?
I would be suggesting...
A CARE program to beg your pardon.
I would be suggesting an ongoing program of support for the most vulnerable in the society that's not just part, that is takes into account the contraction in the economy. In terms of how it's afforded, I would be in favor of modest borrowings to enable that to be financed. I don't think it can be done very easily out of the existing fiscal envelope, given the fact that tax revenues are down, whatever it is, percent-wise, it was around, $70 to $80 billion originally. So that is not going to enable them to finance it easily out of the existing fiscal space. But, you know, they're still running a primary surplus at a time when we're going through a very serious contraction.
Yes.
So, Jamaica is trying to navigate this thing in an extraordinarily conservative way fiscally. So yes. I think that, you know, some people would commend the government for that, but I think it's actually dangerous, because if we are not careful, we may have social fallout and consequences, even in the school system and the education system. The education budget is stressed. It was slightly reduced in the third supplemental, and you know we're in a situation where we're going to have a whole cohort of students that have had some serious damage to their educational impact. And you know, they try to roll out some tablets and so on, but again, it's a very modest rollout.
But on the point of modesty, let me ask you though, because obviously someone watching us right now would say, okay, so if you would suggest that you do a CARE program too, and the opposition leader suggests borrow to fund it, borrow from where?
Well, I don't think they have any problem accessing credit. Jamaica's bonds are strong, with our credit rating is good. People have recognized that we have been fiscally prudent for nearly 7-8 years now. So we have access to borrowing. Our reputation in the financial markets is good. There was one other aspect of the CARE program which I wanted to just mention
Yeah,
quickly.
I know you won't forget it, but let me just
Sure.
that point. So you say that the finance minister focusing on debt to GDP ratio and that the management of that, and I seem to hear you say that maybe it's a conservative approach. You could have classified the approach as conservatism. So you say borrow some more. So are you saying that the administration right now should be more expansive in borrowing and spending in this time?
Yeah.
But for how long can they care? Because we don't know where this ends.
We don't know. So, I mean, the projections are that things should start to improve as the vaccination is rolled out around the world, and the richer countries are really focused on that now. Some, like Israel, has done a third of their population.
Yes.
The UK have done over 10%. America is coming along. So, I was in a forum that the Jamaica Stock Exchange put on, an investment forum. Greg Fisher from Jefferies, the investment house, indicated he thought by June things should start to turn around in the US. So I'm not talking about a very lengthy period of time, but I do think we need to finance a CARE program for the next 6 months and then review it. We can review it at 6 monthly intervals, but I don't think we can just leave the people unprotected at all. The point I want to make,
Yes, please.
Small business. There was a small business grant under the CARE program. The take-up was poor. And the reason for that is because a lot of the small businesses are not fully formalized, and so they couldn't meet some of the bureaucratic requirements that were put in place as conditions of accessing that grant. And I think that we need to be a little more flexible at this time in dealing with small business. Yes, they may not have all their permits and so on, but I don't think that should be a basis for allowing them to fold.
Yes.
Because it's going to be counterproductive to the economy as a whole and the society. People live off of those things, so we can't let them just go to the wall.
Very early in this crisis, opposition leader, the finance minister, called on the IMF accessing a rarely used facility for balance of payment support. Would you advise him to go there again for the funds that would be needed to put into a care package too, up to the September quarter?
Not necessarily from the IMF, because that was a facility. Over 100 countries, I think, accessed that as a kind of emergency facility as a buffer for the balance of payments. As it's turned out, George, interestingly, because of the increase in remittances in 2020, which was
no
remarkable.
one forecast. We all thought it would plunged,
our balance of payments hasn't really been hit that hard, and in fact the dollar has, it's moved around a bit and it's up near 150 now, but it could, I think people were expecting it to be much worse given the fallout in the tourism industry, which I think says a lot about the actual contribution on a net basis of the tourism industry to the local foreign exchange market. But so no, I wouldn't necessarily say they have to go to the IMF, but there are other sources of
capital markets. You say are very accommodating on this time.
Yeah, and the local capital market if they don't want to borrow entirely in foreign exchange. So yes, I mean, I'm just saying. I think, and what are we talking about? 1% of GDP, perhaps, or I think you'd have to design the program and see what it would cost, but that would be roughly $20 billion, and that could really make a big difference, and it would also be a stimulant to the economy.
Yes.
Because the people who get that money consume nearly all of it.
Yes.
So that would have a big multiplier effect and would tend to help businesses get back on their feet. So there are other benefits, not just from the point of view of a social protection, but also from the point of view of economic stimulus.
Got you on that. We're speaking with the opposition leader, Mark Golding, talking about everything COVID related because, it concerns every sector of society and how the Jamaican economy will emerge on the other side, wherever that other side will emerge from. Stay with us. More after this.